belonging to Blackness. Welcome to Season 6 of the podcast. I'm your host, Dr. India Lorik Wilmot. Welcome to another episode. Today's guest is Dr. Shadan Deleveaux, Head for Recruiting for the Global Partnerships team at Google. During his tenure at Google, he developed the first iteration of Google's inclusive hiring process, a methodology now employed across the company to ensure equity in the hiring process. Shadan's expertise in marketing, business development, and talent acquisition spans over 2 decades, when he previously worked at companies such as Nestle Purina, Colgate-Palmolive, and L'Oreal USA. In addition to publishing articles on career and professional development through Fortune and facilitating workshops for groups like the Aspen Institute, the U.S. Department of State, and Emerson Technology, Shadan co-founded the organization Technology for Families in Need, or TechFIN. TechFIN is a nonprofit organization dedicated to closing the digital divide by distributing thousands of computers to low-income families. So when it comes to the future of diversity, inclusion, equity, and bridging the digital divide, we are excited to dig in a bit deeper and be in conversation with a global leader in this space. So welcome, Shadan.
Thank you so much. Wow, you make all of those things sound pretty awesome. So thank you.
And they are awesome. So we're looking forward to learning more about what it means to belong to Blackness for you. So are you ready?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's get into it.
Give Black Alliance is proud to support the podcast Belonging to Blackness, hosted by India Lorik Wilmot. The podcast is an exploration of all aspects of our Black communities, including gifts of time, talent, and treasure, while shedding a positive light on the African-descended experience globally. The Give Black Alliance informs, reforms, and transforms philanthropy to acknowledge and partner with our communities in order to bring about equitable change for all. To learn more about Give Black Alliance, visit us at giveblackalliance.org.
Act 1, Call to Adventure. All right, Shadan. So much of what inspires us and gives us purpose is autobiographically rooted. You have family ties to Jamaica and the Bahamas, Boston, and now New York, where you're currently based. So how has your family life, your upbringing inspired you to focus your professional endeavors in marketing, branding, business operations, and things that are HR related? I'm interested to hear a little bit more about your grandmother's influence.
I am, as you said, the product of recent immigrants. My father's actually from Jamaica. My maternal grandmother's from the Bahamas. That influence on who I am shows up in different ways. My maternal grandmother didn't finish the 6th grade. She grew up on a small island called Andros, where she had to help her family on the farm and really just raise money to help the family subsist. So when she came to the States, one of the things that she always encouraged was for her kids and her grandkids to really pursue their education. And she would always have this saying, get your education. It's the one thing that no one can ever take from you. So in my mind, as I pursued my bachelor's and then my MBA and then eventually the doctorate, that refrain of hers was always kind of reverberating throughout my entire being. And it's really the echo of that and the call of that that has caused me to pursue those educational aspirations. When I think of it professionally and how that ties in, one of the things that I've always been passionate about is just people and access. And so when I had the opportunity myself to move into the tech space, I wanted to create pathways for other people to be able to do the same, folks who are underrepresented. When I came into the industry back in 2015, literally less than 2% Black. A country in the population back then was probably 12, 13% Black, just a huge disparity in terms of representation within the industry. Coming into it, I wanted to figure out, how do I make this as accessible to talented folks of all backgrounds as possible? That was the driving force of me entering the industry and moving into talent recruitment in that way. And really just thinking about how do I make systems and processes more porous.
I'm a bit biased being also a child of immigrants too. This whole thing about you have to go and get your education and your upliftment and all the things that's associated with upward mobility. There's a strong connection to education in that particular way as a pathway. So I really appreciate that those lessons that you learned through her example and ambitions translated through your parents and then through to you, that professionally you see that as being also a pathway for others in their own edification professionally.
I couldn't put it any better than that, particularly when you consider the implications of technology and what it affords and what it allows. It's really a bridge builder. It fills gaps because what it does is it democratizes access to information. And so, to your point, that element of immigrant families reinforcing the importance of education, so you could be a doctor.
Doctor, lawyer, engineer, maybe teacher.
Maybe. Doctor, lawyer, engineer, teacher, or failure. That's it. Right? But when you think about the fact that technology in particular is an industry that has the ability to bridge those gaps and democratize access to that information, for me, it created even more of an imperative to have Black and Brown people in those spaces, creating that opportunity for others and creating that awareness. And so it was this multi-layered approach and thought process around the importance of Black and Brown faces in those spaces in particular.
You began your career with a focus on packaging and brand merchandising. And so we should presume that there are parallels to the ways in which prospective hires should approach personal branding when on the job market. For you, what serves as the inspiration for your choice to work in the space of career and professional development, whether that be as a consultant, a coach, a leader at a global company? In other words, what was the pivotal moment that confirmed to you that this was your career path?
Great question. I think part of that has to be answered by looking at my trajectory overall and my career journey in of itself. And so, to your point, I started back at companies like Colgate Palmolive, Ralston Purina, which were traditional packaged goods companies, and enjoyed my time there, absolutely, and learned a ton. And they were great companies, but was really looking for an opportunity to be a lot more passionate about the work that I was doing on a day to day basis. So that was what prompted the decision to go to business school and then ultimately shift into brand marketing. That's how I ended up at L'Oreal. I was at L'Oreal for a long time doing brand marketing, business development, and some campus talent recruitment, things like that, when Google reached out to bring me over. And so, to your question around what was that pivotal moment, it was really that first phone call from the company saying, "Hey, we're thinking about you in this capacity to come over and do some recruiting for us." I'll be honest, prior to that point, I hadn't really thought about doing full lifecycle recruiting or even recruiting at all in the tech space. And the reason for that is there were so few people of color in the tech space at the time. I didn't know anyone who'd made it a career. I didn't know anyone who was talking about it. My colleagues and peers for business school were thinking about investment banking. They were thinking about hedge funds. They were thinking about consulting. No one that I knew was saying, you know what, I'm going to go work in the tech space. And this is a little bit embarrassing, but honestly, the first time I heard from the company, I thought it was a scam. Because for me, I was like, Google's a website. They don't call people. Like, you're not going to get me, scammer.
Hilarious.
But it is so real. So when that shift happened and when I got that call and realized that it was serious, it got me thinking about a couple of things. That marketing training for me really got me to look at folks and their career journeys as one of two things: the product aspect and the marketing aspect. And this goes back to a simple saying, all right, nothing kills a bad product faster than great marketing. And so as I look at people's careers and what they want to be and how they want to progress and things like that, I always ask myself, okay, from a product standpoint, you as a person, as a professional, as a product, do you have all the things you need? Do you have the industry knowledge? Do you have the skill sets? Do you have the competencies? Do you have all of those things? If that answer is yes, great. Then that means you as a professional product, you're good. So how do we fix your marketing, right? How do we fix how other people view you and see you and think of you? And vice versa. Do you have great marketing but poor product? Maybe you're all over the place and have all types of platforms and things like that, but no substance and need to go
Right.
back, build those skills. You see both, especially in this age and era where everyone has a voice and opportunity to create some noise. For me, I think that was how those two things were connected. One, that phone call created that shift in thought around what was important with respect to talent and people and this intersection of talent and innovation. But then, two, my prior experience helped to give me that lens to view folks in their professional selves through that marketing lens.
There's a lot of glitz and glam around folks, but some don't have the content. And some have the content, the expertise, but it's just gray. There's no razzle dazzle. I'm curious to know your experience. What has been your experience as a Black man in the industry to date, especially for someone who's committed to scholarship and love for all mankind?
As a person of color and a Black man in this industry, it's interesting. One, I'll say that things are absolutely changing. I've been in this industry now for over 9 years. And so, nearly a decade after I first came into it, you're seeing great conferences for Black and Brown folks around technology and people gravitating to meeting more Black and Brown software engineers and folks who want to do product management and things like that. The word is out around the opportunity that exists here in a lot of ways, not to everyone, but certainly to more people than when I previously came into the space. Coming in, I think it was this period of time of really trying to understand what it meant to be in a space that wasn't necessarily created for you.
Mm,
When you think about how the companies were founded, the large companies and things like that. A lot of times it was, just college kids who were smart and had a great idea and got their closest friends together and said, hey, you know what? Let's try to make something happen. And they built those companies with them and their friends in mind. And
right.
then it wasn't until later on that someone looked up and said, well, wait a minute, this isn't really representative of our users or our user base or things like that. So, how do we begin to identify talent? And even prior to me coming into it, it was this experience of this is interesting because it's a great space, but not necessarily a space that feels like home. Particularly when you think about the fact that a lot of the companies at the time were making people move to Silicon Valley, for example. Nothing wrong with the Bay and it's beautiful out there and things like that. But when you think of the large population centers of Black and Brown folks, New York, Atlanta, DMV area, Houston, yes, you have Oakland, and they're not taking anything away from Oakland. But again, you're seeing a lot of people who are really being asked to move to the Bay. And so I had no network out there. I was new to the industry. I was, new to the space. I was new to the geography. And really, it was a huge adjustment just trying to get my bearing, understand who I was supposed to be in that space, and still try to figure out how to have impact.
I think a lot of companies, regardless of industry, really underestimate the power and prowess that Black and Brown communities globally possess. They
Mhm.
underestimate our purchasing power, our intellectual power, our cultural influence. Oftentimes, they're kind of way behind the eight ball to try to catch up to say, oh, yeah, here's a missed opportunity. I appreciate you, particularly in tech, to bridge that divide and increase diversity in terms of representation. Because I think it's one thing about if a company says, oh, now we have 3% BIPOC employees.
Yeah.
But where is this 3% distributed within our employee profile?
Mhm.
Are they mid level and below? Are they in the C suite? Like, what are we talking about? How is it that you specifically see some of the challenges and opportunities that you've encountered when it comes to amplifying the need for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in the workplace, particularly for tech or just even writ large from your other professional experiences too, when it comes to DEI and belonging?
When you think about how professional spaces operate and make decisions, there is a huge amount of intentionality that's required in order to see the absence of underrepresented populations. And I think that that's one of the things that I realized a lot of times when companies are making decisions, it's not that they are trying to disregard people of color. A lot of times they're just not even thinking because they're not in their networks, they're not in their sphere of visibility. And so there's just a lack of understanding of the important role that people of color play in this world. And to your point, when you think of the importance of having underrepresented folks at every level of an organization, it's incredibly important because you need the voices of leadership to make sure that that lens always exists. You need it in middle management to ensure that the culture that's being created is hospitable towards the growth and development of more junior folks. And then you need more junior folks to be able to bring that energy, that excitement, that lens, that tapped in pulse of what's happening in the world and the trends and how that can then impact development and ideas and innovation. You need them to actually bring that into that fertile ground that's created by the upper levels of management. So to your point, all of those aspects of DEI and belonging are incredibly important at every single level of an organization. And that's why all that research shows that when companies do it well, they're more profitable, they outperform their peers, they're more innovative, they create more patents. It's a quantitative, definitive proof that doing that well will lead to better economic results. And why wouldn't it? When you think about what populations of people who are historically underrepresented have gone through, overcome, survived just to be where they are, then to be able to thrive despite all those obstacles and challenges, there's a certain unique quality that is introduced to organizations when you bring them in. And so I don't think the importance of that can be overstated at all.
There's something to be said about when we look at our circle of friends and our network,
Mhm.
people flock together. People find commonalities. And oftentimes, if you are the majority of a particular group of people in a certain kind of setting, there are going to be other people that share similar characteristics.
Yeah.
That's part of human behavior and the patterns that we establish. And so transplant that to the work environment, then there's certain things that are unsaid that are implicit in our understanding when we're reviewing CVs, when we're engaged in various hiring activities, interviews, what have you, the dinners, all the different things. It gets codified in that. We see it in other kind of language of expression like, oh, this person's great. However, we didn't really have a connection.
Mhm.
What does that really mean? It's the bias that's built in sometimes. And so I hear you in terms of, well, overcoming that particular challenge. What do we really mean when we're saying, oh, this person wasn't a great fit?
Yeah,
In order to be able to bring more people in so that we can reap the benefits of what inclusion does for our business model and for our bottom line.
absolutely. Listen, to your point, the research shows that there's so many potential areas where bias can creep into a process, even from the language that's used in a job description, even the language that a person writes to talk about what a role is. There's research that shows that if the language is overly masculine, overly aggressive, not only will women not apply to that job, they'll see the company as not being for them.
Mm,
And so if you think about that one decision, someone's writing a role for a head of sales and they say, we need someone who is going to kill the competition and murder their quotas, fiery, aggressive. Like that sounds insane, but you see it, right?
right, right.
You are already alienating a large portion of the population that could be amazing in that role. And this was some of my research that I did for the doctorate is you really take a look at each phase of that hiring process. It's easy to see, okay, well, wait a minute. If that's just a job description, well, what happens when we take a look at candidates and resumes? Research has been proven time and time again that candidates that have Black sounding names get called back less often for job opportunities. And then when they get called back, the roles that they're called back for are more junior than candidates with traditionally white sounding names. So that's the job description. That's the resumes. What happens when you have, people of color actually show up? It really requires a high level of intentionality for any company that's interested in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging to take a critical perspective and a critical eye towards their processes and think, okay, so what are we doing? What are we not doing that can really help us to make sure that we're creating systems that are more porous to talent as opposed to systems that are excluding people based on things that wouldn't actually determine whether they're going to do a good job or not.
Belonging to Blackness, proudly sponsored by Get Connected. Get Connected is a nationally recognized premier cross-cultural and inclusive business networking organization for professionals, business, and civic leaders, entrepreneurs from all cultures across industries and sectors. Our mission is to curate meaningful cross-cultural business and social connections while amplifying, celebrating, documenting, and showcasing the contributions of people of color and allies across our communities. To learn more, visit us at www.getconnected.com.
Act 2, The Road. So, Shadan, how do you play? What are the things that fortify you?
So for me, I believe that I don't separate the things that I do professionally from the things that fortify me. As much as I can, I bring the things that fortify me into my daily life, my daily activities. The reason I do that is because I realized a long time ago that if I tried to separate those things, my career and profession was so demanding, it gained an increasing amount of time and attention from me.
Mm.
And the time that I was spending fortifying myself kept shrinking. And I would try to protect it. But when it's not the thing that's paying the bills and you need to pay the bills, you're going to make the choice to focus your attention, effort, energy, and all those things where you're incentivized to do that. And so for me, I said, okay, that is important to know about myself. And that may not be true for everyone, but that was true of myself. And so it forced me to change my industries. I was like, okay, let me go to industries that I feel more passionate about, that I feel more excited about, that I can actually feel more engaged when I get up in the morning. Let
Mm.
me work in companies and work with people that I actually like and enjoy and want to speak to and can become friends with outside of the workplace. So, yes, it's a job, of course, but also I could develop authentic relationships. One of the things that fortify me is being around people that I care about and being around people that care about me. If I could get some of that from the workplace, I'm being constantly energized, which is what happens. Because now, where I'm pouring into my team and they're pouring into me, we are re energizing each other on a daily basis. I'm fortified by the thought and ideas of the importance of what I do. When I do podcasts, when I do talks like this, when I'm helping folks to understand their career paths and helping them to really generate the ideas, the thoughts, the movements, the actions that help put them into a better place and closer to their ultimate goals, that fortifies me, that fills me up. I love being on stage when I get the opportunity to talk to people about careers and identifying their North Star. And then, of course, you have all the other things, right? The travel. I love to travel, just laying on a beautiful beach with clear water. And I have half my family from Jamaica, half from the Bahamas. So I feel like I grew up on some of the most beautiful beaches in the world. I'm a simple guy. I'm either writing, talking, working, or chilling on a beach somewhere.
Beautiful. I like the beach part, right? Um, and what I'm hearing you say is that what fortifies you is human connection.
Human connection and spiritual connections. I am Christian. My relationship with God is incredibly important to me. I
Mm.
do feel consistently fortified by that relationship itself. But, I believe that we were placed in this place for community. And so God and community.
In addition to your current role at Google, you co-founded Technology for Families in Need, TechFIN. I want to say 2014 or so.
Yes.
So to date, the organization has served approximately 4,000 families with computers and other devices. And TechFIN has received support from companies such as Pfizer, American Online Giving Foundation, and Amazon Smile Foundation with grants, and has garnered attention from local media outlets in the greater tri-state area for its impact. What was the impetus for founding this organization specifically? And why is this work still critical today? Give us the genesis story.
Absolutely. TechFin really started as a result of a conversation with my co-founder and good friend, Nigel Frankson. Nigel and I went to college together. We've been friends ever since then. And later on in life, he was a part of the Big Brothers Association, so Big Brothers Big Sisters. And he had his little brother who he was working with that was having kind of just a tough time in school. We were having this conversation around that one time. Nigel was struggling a little bit because he knew that in his personal family, with his blood relatives, there had been times where he had given family members laptops and computers and saw the impact and the change that it had on their educational performance. And he was struggling about whether he should do the same for his non relative little brother. And so the conversation that we ended up having was, listen, if we're thinking about doing this and if this is a problem, it's probably not just a problem with this one kid in Brooklyn. There's probably a much larger problem at play here. So we did the research. And what we found was that when you take a look at families that make less than $50,000 a year, a third of them don't have a computer in the home. And if you think about all of the things that we've already talked about on this podcast, what the implication of that is just not having a computer in the home and the things that that affords access to, jobs, educational opportunity, healthcare visits, all of the things that a person can't do. It was immediately apparent that this was a huge issue we wanted to try to address. We put some pen to paper and it took a little while to get off the ground. So it's funny when you say that we've impacted about 4,000 families. That's true. But there were a lot of years of just planning and thinking about how to make it happen. At this point, we're helping about 1,000 families a year with the potential and the need to do just so much more. Really trying to continue to grow the effort and identify new partners to donate hardware because the need is greater than ever before because of the pace of technological innovation. So, as you said, Nigel and I had this conversation back in 2013, 2014. This was before artificial intelligence hit the scene.
Right.
And one of the things about AI, and as amazing as it is, incredible as all of the future opportunities will be, is that I wholeheartedly believe that the advent of AI in its current form will increase the rate of innovation because now the machines are teaching the machines. So machine learning and things like that, I think will cause the rate of innovation to increase. Well, if you have innovation increasing and technological advances increasing, but you still have people that don't have a laptop in the home, well, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure that that gap widens. While we've been able to help some people, I think that there's even more opportunity to continue to help people on a greater scale moving forward.
I applaud the work that you all are doing, and I can only imagine how these issues were further exacerbated when we were in the midst of COVID. I know for myself and a group that I've worked with where we serve predominantly young Black and Brown girls. It was more than just, oh, do you have access to the hardware of the computers? In COVID, something as basic that we take for granted around having access to internet, they couldn't even really effectively engage in online learning that they were mandated. The equipment that they had in their homes, if they had any, were so
Mhm.
antiquated that it couldn't even get online, or their families could not afford consistent access to the internet for them to utilize the devices. Right. And so I can imagine that some of the things that TechFin, yourself, and the other founders and staff were also grappling with at the time.
Listen, the stories were heartbreaking. We did one distribution in Brooklyn and we had this mother come up to us and she was so grateful and she basically had tears in her eyes. And she said, listen, single mom, I do have a computer in the home. She said, but I have two kids. With everything locked down and all the learning being virtual, every day I have to decide Am I going to work, or are my kids going to be able to go to school? And if so, which kid?
Wow.
Again, just being at those distributions and seeing the happiness and the smiles and knowing that that's just one step in this chain of things that needs to be addressed to help close these gaps of inequity. It's a mammoth sized problem, but if we're diligent and we're intentional and people recognize it and we begin to really just create awareness, I do think that there are things that we can do to continue to resolve it.
Mhm. Your point around AI and this notion of where the technology is teaching itself, there always will be a need for human input and innovation. But I will say, as a sidebar, it's pretty scary. We're already kind of behind because we're not in the sector in the way that we really should be in terms of our own access and utilization. But then when you have technology sort of building on itself, and you have some of us who still don't even know what code is, then where are we?
To me, there's a problem that not enough people are talking about with respect to folks being left behind. And it brings up a question that I keep asking different people. When I look at Black and Brown people, there seem to be just a ton of issues around access, equity, income, financial opportunity, everything.
Yeah.
So, where is the comprehensive plan? Just a visionary proposal to address all of these things over a multi decade time span?
Mhm.
Where is that? Who's working on that? Maybe your listeners have an answer. It's something that I've been asking people, really started to think about and think about how I could contribute to that, because that's what's going to be required to help address just some of these gaps. Because look, we're talking about the gap in technology, representation in technology, but you could apply that to law, finance, real estate, right?
Right.
And then it's not just professional, it's ownership, it's wealth, it's healthcare.
Mhm.
In every aspect of life, there are opportunities for us to be a lot more strategic about how we're closing the gap. I'm curious about who's working on that comprehensive plan.
Right. If we know what the problems are, what are the solutions? When I think about the solutions, I also can't help but to think about the Supreme Court ruling on race conscious admissions. That Supreme Court ruling was pretty much based on education and higher education specifically. We've seen the impact of that in terms of a national shift in corporate and community responses to DEI and belonging initiatives and policies. You see organizations, even if they may believe there's something to this idea of supporting these marginalized communities and bringing them so that they're not set aside, we still find that these organizations, some of whom are pulling away from efforts that amplify equity, that address inclusion for fear of legal threats, while you have
Yes.
others that are doubling down on the need to keep or restore some of these policies and practices because they see that there's utility. In the same way as you're thinking about what are the solutions, twofold, what do you think this shift means in the field of staff recruitment or even for funding for nonprofits like TechFIN?
So it's a broad question. To chunk it out a little bit, I think that the Supreme Court decision was detrimental to efforts around DEI in many ways. And to your point, it was directed towards education, but we've definitely seen a chilling effect and impact on the professional world as well. There's a very real and intentional effort to remove diversity as part of the conversation around hiring, education, et cetera. I think it's important for people to, one, vote with their dollars and their patronage. As you're looking at organizations that you support, that you buy from, that you visit, that you patronize, what are their views and their perspectives? Because I think that this time really just calls for organizations that are still passionate about the space and still believers of the space to make that clear, at least to their customers. And their customers should have an expectation that their values align. When you talk about what the immediate impact is for the nonprofit space, it's going to depend on the nonprofit. I think that in the current environment, it's harder to focus specifically on certain populations of people. TechFin in particular just focuses on underserved and low-income families. So our mandate and our perspective is really we're in the business of helping people that are low income to get technology. So I'm not worried about us in particular or nonprofits that have a mandate in that regard. I think what you're seeing and what you have seen is that businesses that focus on specific populations, specific races of people, and things like that are having a more difficult time because they're being targeted through lawsuits and threat of litigation.
Which is unfortunate, right? Because then it gets a little nitpicky in terms of applying for funding for nonprofits like TechFIN. So you can say, here's our mission and vision. It's inclusive in its language. But then when you think about what's the demographics of the actual recipient population because of where you're located, for a lot of nonprofits that are similar, it's like, anyone could read and say, wow, okay, but then 85% are BIPOCs. Someone can always reframe that to say, well, you're targeting this, and this is the reason why we're withholding this grant. And I think that's a fear for a lot of nonprofits. Either they're trying to rebrand themselves, downplay other kinds of characteristics so that they can participate and take advantage of what the funding environment is like because of the political impacts of such a ruling. And then you have others who are like, hey, forget about this. We're still going to go in because this is still very much a need. And that if we stop talking about very specific aspects of the same population, even if it's low income or underserved or whatever the lexicon of framing is, we still have a component of race and gender and all of the other kinds of identifiers. Sad.
It is. And I think that the time that we're in is going to require companies and people really to be bold. I believe that in general, companies and people can't shrink in the face of challenges. We're in a difficult time in our country's history, a very divisive time and things like that. I'm still optimistic though.
Because I was going to ask you what you think the future holds. So there is optimism.
I'm incredibly optimistic. And I have to be. Every person of color in this country has to be. Because when you think about the fact that our ancestors came over here chained in the bows of ships, what they must have thought the outlook was in future generations, and they still persisted in a way that allows us to be sitting here right now having this conversation. How could we not be optimistic? We would be doing them a disservice. It's almost disrespectful. I'm forced to be optimistic because I'm the benefit of someone else's optimism.
Act 3, Where We Land. Dr. Shadan Deleveaux, thank you very much for coming in and talking funding to diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, TechFIN, and all the things. For folks who are listening and want to follow, perhaps attend one of your speaking events, or if they want to learn more about TechFIN, how they can be involved and to support, where can they find you?
LinkedIn. I'm all over LinkedIn, of course. Vogue Consulting, so VEAUX consulting.com. For TechFIN specifically, it's tech-fin.org, so TECH-FIN.org. Those are the three main places: LinkedIn, vogueconsulting.com, and tech-fin.org.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shadan Deleveaux, for being on Belonging to Blackness.
Thank you for having me. It's really been a pleasure.
If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with others and be sure to subscribe. Find us on my website, www.indialoricwilmot.com. Follow us on IG and Facebook at belongingtoblackness_podcast for the latest fashion and accessories. Visit www.shopbelongingtoblackness.com. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.